Aloha kako. All right, so the topic that we're going to be looking at today, I call theories in flux. And this deals with new or more recent discoveries that have changed the way that we view the settlement patterns and migration routes in the Pacific region over time. And so we are trying to figure out how the heck people got here into the Pacific, and been looking at different theories and also exploring some of the oral traditions from the people of the Pacific. And now we are going to examine some more recent discoveries that are also contributing to our overall view of this topic. So here is the Great Pacific Ocean, and as we all know, it's extremely large. However, when you take into account the curvature of the Earth, and then it seems even more immense. You can barely even, make out any of the continental land masses on the periphery there. So, of course, the question from the beginning of European exploration into the Pacific has always been, how did these people settle these islands? Where do they come from, being that the Pacific Ocean is so large? So the great debate, right? Where did these people come from? How did they get here? Has always been, uh, curiosity for um, for Westerners. And the popular theory has been, as we discussed before with Roger Green, was that Polynesians are descendants of the Lapita people, right? And they slowly worked their way over thousands of years from Melanesia or from Asia through Melanesia and eventually into Polynesia. And that these migrations into Polynesia began approximately 1600 years ago, which of course is the earliest dates that we have from the Lapita civilization. And then they eventually of course radiated out to the far corners of the Polynesian Triangle. Now, here is the commonly accepted migration pattern of the Polynesian Triangle. So, beginning at the western Polynesian Samoa, shooting it over to central Polynesia, approximately 300 BC, and then making it over there to central Polynesia about 0 AD, and then from there radiating it out to the other islands. And you can see some of the corresponding dates. Yeah. So that is what has been taught for a long time. But there is a problem, of course. Some questions have popped up over various aspects of this theory, especially in regard to the settlement dates and migration routes, right? Questions such as, how long did it actually take to settle the Pacific, right? If the people were in the Pacific for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, then why would they have waited so long? Yeah. In what order were the Polynesian islands settled? Was it really in that order from Samoa to Marquesas, and then from there to there, all that kind of stuff? Or could there have been multiple migrations and various routes? Uh, the extent of the Polynesian world has also come into question as well, because for a long time, experts believed that the Polynesian ancestors just spread throughout the Pacific. But did they or could they have actually gone to the other continents on the other side of the Pacific, such as the Americas or elsewhere? Certainly is possible. So these are popular questions that aren't really explained in the previous theory. And so we're going to pick these things apart. Now, researchers have long considered two main scenarios for the settling of Oceania. One is known as the express train theory, which claims that Polynesians set out from Southeast Asia and really kind of blew through Melanesia fairly quickly on their way out into Polynesia. The slow boat theory, however, claims the opposite, that people from Southeast Asia slowly worked their way eastward into the Pacific through Melanesia over a long period of time, often thousands of years, and then eventually made their way out into Polynesia and continued that settlement pattern. So these are the two main ones. Now, the slow boat theory has been the popular theory for a very long time, and the reason for that are several. Firstly, humans have been in and around the Pacific for a very long time. When you look at the Australian Aboriginals, those are some of the oldest people on Earth. They date back to 60, 70,000 years ago. The people of Papua New Guinea, also very old. You have those people date back to some 40,000 years ago, and there have been stone tools that date back to those dates as well. And we know that there was a land bridge that Papua New Guinea and Australia were connected at one point in time, which allowed the Aboriginals to move and work their way into Papua New Guinea. However, there was never a land bridge that existed or that connected Asia to Australia. At least no, there wasn't any kind of land bridge during the existence of humans. So that means that the oldest Australian Aboriginals had to build watercraft. They had to sail across that channel to make their way to Australia. Now, it doesn't mean that they're expert pole navigators at that point, but the fact that they're building watercraft and in the water and crossing bodies of water tens of thousands of years ago, uh, it causes one to wonder, well, these people must have been developing sailing and navigation, for a very, very, very long time. And so thus the slow boat theory was was very popular. However, the other thing that makes it popular is that the Lapita pottery that we saw before and we talked about, it also supports this theory because of again, Lapita pottery sites are found throughout Melanesia, and they move eastward into Polynesia, and they are carbon dated, right, as we discussed before. And so it shows that there was actual migration from Melanesia into Polynesia. So that's some very strong evidence. However, there are some issues also with that slow boat theory. The Lapita dates uh, are relatively recent. They don't date back tens of thousands of years ago, right? They're only about 3,400 years ago or so. And so if there's people living on Papua New Guinea here for 40,000 years, then why would it have taken them tens of thousands of years to make it down here to the coastline where you have a Lapita site, right? And then, oops, and then the same thing, right? Working their way across, fairly short distance to these islands and these sites over here. Why would it have taken them so long to do that? And that is a valid question. Did they wait that long? If they did, why? If not, then could there have been other migrations that we simply do not have physical evidence to support? That is certainly possible as well. And then, of course, the other question is how long would it really take to explore and settle Polynesia? I know it's a vast region, but really, would it take that long? And also, along those lines, would it make sense that people actually sailed from Samoa all the way over to the Marquesas? Um, and the reason why we ask those questions is because today we have traditional voyaging canoes that are sailing the Pacific, and they are giving us real-time data on how long it would take to make your way from one island group to another island group via these traditional methods and techniques. And so from Tonga to Rarotonga, is there a connection between those two? Quite possible, but it's only about a 7 day sail. And then from Rarotonga up through to Tahiti, another 7 days, then all the way through the Tuamotus over to the Marquesas, another 10 days. And you can get from one end of Polynesia to the other. Why would these guys here, Lapita people here in Samoa, shoot it all the way across over here, not knowing that the Marquesas was there? I mean, it's possible, but it's also very possible because there's Lapita sites over here in Tonga that you could just move this way, right? I mean, there's islands here. All you got to do is just continue moving this way. You're going to hit islands. You're going to hit islands, hit islands, hit islands. Yeah. Likewise, from the Marquesas, you know, shooting all the way down here to Rapa Nui or Easter Island, that's like finding a needle in a haystack. Easter Island is not an archipelago; it's just one singular island, and a very small one at that. So very difficult to hit that. But if you just follow these islands here, that's going to point you in that direction. Yeah, so that's why questions about the slow boat theory are coming into play here. All right, so we have this reading called the Fire Caves of Nanumagu, which takes place over in Tuvalu and on the island of Nanumaga. And it's a fascinating story there. If you guys recall, the natives continue with this story that they referred to this house under the sea. They claim that their ancestors came from or originated from this house that was under the sea. And there are these researchers over there that just kind of discounted their stories, said, you guys are just folklore and all that kind of stuff, and there's no basis for these stories. But the natives kept on coming back. They said, no, bro, right over here, go down to the water. There's a house under the sea. That's where we came from. So finally, these researchers, they strapped on some scuba gear. They went down 120 feet below the ocean surface, and lo and behold, they find a cave. And in that cave, they found evidence of fire, charred remains of fire. And the fascinating thing is that the very last time that cave would have been exposed above, water, when the sea level was a lot lower, was some 8,000 years ago, suggesting that there could have been earlier migrations to these islands that we simply are not aware of, because the coastlines or the old coastlines where those migrations would have come into contact with, and where these civilizations would have been set up at, are today very much underwater. Right? The ocean fluctuates, not so much, from year to year or century to century, but if you're going thousands and thousands of years, yeah, it does fluctuate. So that's something that people really haven't taken into account before, and it has started to encourage underwater archaeology, which is very difficult to do, but there has been there have been stuff discovered through underwater archaeology in various parts of the Pacific as well as the world. But the other fascinating thing about this story is that it doesn't only challenge our long-held beliefs about migrations, but it also helps us to substantiate or give credence to these oral traditions. Right? For Western researchers for a long time, when they come into the Pacific and they hear a lot of these stories, they just kind of discount them immediately, and then go to the research and base their theories on the physical evidence that is uncovered, not taking into account again these oral stories. But this is a very important reminder that there is value to these oral traditions. We just have to understand how to decipher them, and can we put that together with other data that's been collected, and research efforts that are ongoing to get a more fuller or comprehensive view or understanding of Oceania. And I believe we can. So when we take a hard look at the Pacific, or the Polynesian region here, then this would be a more sensible migration route, right? Island groups that point or lead to other island groups versus in the red, what the traditionally held view of the Pacific settlement is, right, that we saw earlier. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done in this field. Now, research like that has given rise to new migration and settlement maps, such as this one that comes out of Aotearoa. And you notice here that it still is showing migration that's moving from Melanesia eastward into Polynesia, but it doesn't have this crazy arrow, oops, right, from Samoa to Marquesas anymore. You see it's following these islands here. It's following these islands here to Easter Island. You also notice that they have question marks uh, on these dates, suggesting that they don't know for sure, right? Those dates are approximations based on evidence so far uncovered. But the ocean remains very fluid, place in flux, so it is quite difficult to timestamp definitively when the first people arrived, right? That kind of thing. Another fascinating thing about this map is that you'll notice an arrow pointing east of Easter Island. What is east of Easter Island? The Americas, right? South America down over here. So is it possible that Polynesian navigators made their way to the Americas? Why not? Right? They made their way all throughout the Pacific to much smaller targets. They can certainly hit the Americas. I mean, even with your eyes closed, you can hit the Americas. It's a big wall on that side of the Pacific. So why not? Certainly it's possible. All right, so we'll look more at that stuff in a little bit. Okay, so the express train theory. The claim here is that Pacific explorers sailed directly through Melanesia from Southeast Asia into Polynesia in a few short centuries. The reason why it's credible is because Polynesians, Lapita people, and Southeast Asians are farming cultures. All right, and most of the plants that are introduced in Polynesia that are known as canoe plants or Polynesian introductions originated from Southeast Asia. So that's a very strong argument there. Also, the Lapita pottery shards that we've talked about, when they're carbon dated, they show a fairly quick migration from Melanesia into Polynesia. So it's not like they're like thousands of years apart or whatever. So it's fairly short and fast. And so this has given rise to this idea that it was a fairly quick movement through Melanesia, the express train theory. However, the one thing that has really hung up researchers or really kind of created a problem for researchers here is the evidence or the significant amount of Melanesian DNA within the Polynesian genome, which suggests that there is a tremendous amount of mixing between Polynesians and Melanesians, which takes thousands of years to happen, or at the very least, a long time. And so this is another reason why the slow boat theory was uh, was a popular one. However, that whole DNA mystery has been recently solved in 2016. There was an international study that looked at prehistoric DNA from skeletal remains dating back some 3,000 years ago from Polynesia, Vanuatu, and Tonga specifically. And the DNA sequence add up to 231,000 positions across the genomes of each skeleton. Now, those results were compared to 800 present-day people from 83 populations in Asia and Oceania. And what they found was that the Lapita people are not related, or they're not descendants of the Melanesian or the Papuan people. Yeah, there's no evidence actually of mixing between the Polynesian and Papua peoples in ancient times or longer ago. Polynesians have actually a shared ancestry with the indigenous people of Taiwan and the Philippines rather than the people of Melanesia or the Papuans. And um, so that is pretty remarkable. Now, what about the large amount of Melanesian DNA in the Polynesian genome? Well, it occurs in long, unbroken chunks that was incorporated into the genome, the Polynesian genome, approximately 500 to 2,500 years ago, which is after the Lapita period. Okay, so that's important to remember. So what this suggests is that once the Polynesian ancestors, worked their way quickly through Melanesia and into Polynesia. Then they sailed back to Melanesia, and that is where they had prolonged interaction and contact with Melanesians, and then the mixing, occurred back and forth. So today, the express train theory is the main or the popular theory to explain how the Pacific was actually settled. Okay, so fascinating stuff there, but there are more discoveries, other um, recent discoveries that are challenging our long-held views of Oceania. So one from one of your readings takes us back to Indonesia. Over there in Bali, there is a big cave, which you see here, which is above ground, not like in Nanumaga, and it's called Liang Bua. And in 2004, there was a team of archaeologists from Australia that were conducting a dig over there, and they're looking for one thing, but they uncovered something else. What was fascinating was that they found the remains of a small person, a hobbit, what they thought was a child at first, but then when they submitted the bones in for analysis, they realized, oh, this is actually an aged human. It's an adult, but it's not um, a little person or hobbit, where you have these physical deformities, elongated torsos, and you know appendages, disproportionate appendages, those kinds of things. Everything was like Honey, I Shrunk the Kid, mini me, right? Proportional, just small. On on average, the height of a 3-year-old child. And the earliest hobbit here that was discovered dated back to some 18,000 years ago. Now, what's also fascinating is that there are stories, folklore from the native population there in Flores that talk about this community of little people. They say that they're tricksters, that they would play jokes on them and all this kind of stuff. And and so it's very possible that there are two uh groups or races of people of Homo sapien living on the same island that overlapped for a period of time, which is really, really interesting, especially interesting if you are from Hawaii, because did Hawaii have a race of little people or hobbits? Yes, we did. According to our oral traditions, this people were called Menehune, right? And we see the Menehune all over the place. It's used as a marketing gimmick for all kinds of businesses out there. It's still very common, but very little is generally understood about Menehune by the public. We tend to think of Menehune as these little pixies or fairies, all that kind of stuff. If you are a kid and you grow up here, you hear stories about Menehune. They're these little magical creatures or people, and they build fish ponds and heiaus and other types of amazing, um, projects in the course of one night. And so there's a lot of those kinds of stories. But if you take a deep dive into Hawaiian oral traditions, you'll start to uncover that, oh, for us, Menehune were an actual people. Yeah, according to our legends, the great sorcerer Kahanoa Neva led a migration of Menehune from Tahiti to Hawaii, and they were introduced on the islands of Oahu and Kauai in order to serve the great chiefess Kahikuokalani, and to build um, heiau and whatnot for this chiefess. According to legend, there are other waves, other migrations of people that came in later years, and there are battles that broke out between the Menehune and these new arrivals. And on Oahu, at least the Menehune were forced to retreat over to Kauai, and then finally on Kauai they were able to settle down and intermarry over there, and they lived relatively peaceful on that island. So there's more about Menehune when if you dig deeper, but it is fascinating because when you go to Tahiti, Tahitian oral traditions claim that their main laboring class of people were known as Manahune. And these guys are the expert craftsmen, artisans, builders. They were responsible for propping up, Tahitian civilization. And so were the Manahune of Tahiti the Menehune of Hawaii? It's very, very possible. But these are the things that these oral traditions are able to shed some light on. Um, so here in Hawaii, we do have oral evidence, right, that we had a race of hobbits, but we have no physical evidence. How do we account for that? Could physical evidence be forthcoming with more archaeological work? Probably not. I mean, we've pretty much scoured these islands over the past 150 years. Um, could, however, the stories of Menehune be the residual memory of an actual hobbit people in another place, another corner of the Pacific, from our distant past that has, traveled with us on canoes from island to island over the years? That certainly is possible. Um, we certainly have a number of stories that have come across the Pacific, with migrations that we still maintain today, or bits and pieces of stories. So certainly, that the Menehune could exist here, right? However, could Hawaiian Menehune actually just be normal humans like us? We're just smaller in stature compared to later Polynesian arrivals who were much larger in stature. That also could be possible as well, right? According to Western sailors, King Kamehameha was at least 7 feet tall. And he said that his hand is so large that he could wrap around the entire face of a man. And so this guy was like MBA, big brooding warrior chief. Next to him, shoot, I could be a freaking Menehune, right? So it's all relative. Anyways, uh it's all fascinating to contemplate. But the other interesting thing about the Menehune story here is that it actually is another account of a migration, right? Just like Pele, we talk about all these other guys. The Menehune story is a migration story, and it talks about an actual people that came from elsewhere and arrived here and set up shop. All right. Uh, Nothing has changed for you, but I have changed my clothes and I changed my venue. I had to go into my office at UH, so I'm going to finish up this PowerPoint here. All right, so we are going to bring it now over to the Americas, talking about recent discoveries, changing the ways that we view the Pacific and the movement and of people, uh, and all that good stuff. So let's look at the Americas here. We all know that there was a land bridge that once connected Siberia to North America, upon which people were able to cross over and eventually populate the Americas. However, the oldest dates of people in the Americas date goes back to about 16,000 years ago. The interesting thing is that even though there was a corridor that from Alaska into North America that allowed the influx of people that was open around 14 to 15,000 years ago, that corridor was not able to support life until only 13,000 years ago. Okay, so how do we explain people in North America before they could have even crossed over on that land bridge? And that is why there have been some new theories coming up, which point to the coastline, possible coastline migrations along these ice sheets and into the Americas, because those people there would have been able to sustain themselves on these very rich kelp forests, from the ocean. So it's not to say that they sailed or they navigated on vessels, but they were coming down along the coastline in, and in close contact with the ocean. So that is really interesting. Now, in addition to that, we have campsites down in Chile, all the way down in South America, that date back to 14 to 18,000 years ago, which predate even the earliest peoples in North America. So how do we account for that, right? Because migrations from North America to South America supposedly took place about 12,000 years ago. And so how do we have people in South America before there are even people in North America? That is a cause of a lot of questions. The Clovis people are the ancestors for approximately 80% of Native Americans. But what about the other 20%? Where do what ancestry is that? Where do those guys come from? Uh, could they have come from the Pacific or from across the Pacific? And they certainly could have, right? We have record of American crops found throughout ancient Asia, China, as well as India, before Westerners or Christopher Columbus. And so we cannot attribute these items to the Columbian exchange. But maize, sunflower, anonas, peanut, squash, yam, beans, sweet potato, chili pepper, you name it, right? Peanuts in China date back to 2300 BC. Wow, that's pretty amazing. So how do these things get there, right? From the Americas. When you look at linguistics, there are a number of place names throughout the Americas that are basically Polynesian or Austronesian words. And there are also just other words in general where you can see the similarity, the linguistic similarities between these different cultures. So that is quite compelling as well. Now, also down in Chile, there were other campsites found that don't date back to 14,000 years ago or whatever's. They only date back to about 622 years, but it's still, that is earlier than Christopher Columbus arriving. And the reason why that's important is because in those campsites, they actually found chicken bones that have an identical genetic match to Samoan and Tongan chicken bones. So that is a smoking gun that there was some kind of contact between between Polynesia and Americas prior to the arrival of Europeans. Because, of course, we know that chickens can't swim very far, and they certainly cannot fly very far. And so they had to have been brought by people, introduced by people. Now, whether you had, some Hawaiians or Tongans, let's say, that sailed over to the Americas ate their huli huli chicken over there, then left their bones, and then came back. Or vice versa. Uh, some Native Americans that sailed out, snagged some chickens, and then went back home. Uh, we don't know. But what matters is that there was contact, right? Um, that's what's so fascinating about this. So, yeah, there was a meeting up of these people. Oh, what happened? I skipped over this one. I was wondering where this slide went. I totally hit the button, and I don't know what happened. But anyways, yeah, this slide just simply talks about, of course, you could have Polynesians or people of the Pacific Islands sail over to the Americas. We actually do have some oral traditions in various cultures that talk about voyagers or navigators who have sailed east and have hit, massive islands. Here in Hawaii, a story talks about how this island is so big, he couldn't find his way up or around it, and so he sailed back. And the people asked, "Well, are we going to go back, to that big island and check it out?" And he said, "No." And they said, "Why?" He said, "Oh, because there's already people over there." Over here in Kiribati, they have a story that is very similar, right? A continuous wall of land to the east, and it's not an island, but a vast country with high mountains and rivers, which lies further east than all the islands. That's quite compelling, right? So, anyways, certainly could happen. And in 2014, Mexico's National Laboratory for Genomics and Biodiversity, they analyzed some 354 Polynesian people from 17 different islands, and what they uncovered was quite interesting. That there's actually trace amount of Native American ancestry found in a number of different Polynesian groups, especially those from Eastern Polynesia, such as the Tuamotus, Marquesas, Mangareva, as well as Rapa Nui. Native American sequences were very short and nearly identical, so it suggests a one-time meeting long ago between the two cultures rather than sustained contact, right? They didn't mix heavily like Melanesian and Polynesian did. And that the Native American DNA first appeared in the Marquesas on Fatuhiva about 28 generations ago, or approximately 1150 what is CE. And so it is, so again, there is more evidence now to indicate that there was contact between the two worlds. And so, yeah, it's quite interesting, but there's more and more and more information that's being uncovered that's changing the way that we view the world. And I thought I had a end slide, and I forgot that it was this one. So yeah, um, the more that we uncover things, the more we realize just how much more there is to learn, right? And so that's one of the fascinating things about all this. Keep your eyes open and see what kinds of new discoveries are popping up in this area. Okay, that is it for now. Mahalo a nui, and I'll speculators.